Good evening once again. Welcome to Rwanda Television News. My name is Gloria Mutesi. Starting us off tonight, officials in the Ministry of Education have announced that a special task force has been established to follow up on the problems that have become evident in the teacher recruitment process that resulted into suspension of 3 top officials from the Rwanda Education Board. We have this report. Up to 3,000 people who had sat for and passed the teacher recruitment exams reportedly did not get jobs despite more than 7,000 places available, sparking controversy. It was clear that they needed many teachers, according to the figures they were announcing, and we thought that a person who got 80% in the exam would be among the first to be recruited, only to be shocked when the recruitment process began that people in the 90% range were not getting jobs. I sat for the exam in 2019 in Kayonza district and got 73%. Afterwards, other exams were announced and they said people who had passed the first exams did not have to sit again. So I didn't bother, thinking they would start with the waiting list of 2019. However, after the recruitment process began, we found that people who had sat for the exams after us were getting jobs before us, and we wondered why. The debacle resulted in the suspension of 3 top officials at the Rwanda Education Board, and while visiting schools on Tuesday, the Minister of Education said the issue is being dealt with swiftly. In any case, a task force has been established to resolve the problem of teachers so that it is settled before the end of this week, and the teachers have been allocated to their places. You can see that schools have reopened and we should have teachers, so there has been a delay. We need many teachers, and 7,800 should have got placement by now, yet the deficit stands at around 19,000, even 20,000. Had it been done properly, that first group would have been hired, and that is what is going to be done so that we can move on in the recruitment process and hire the rest. It's going to be done extraordinarily fast. Another issue the ministry has to deal with is complaints from parents that some schools have been hiking fees despite being instructed not to do so, though not all are guilty of this.
We have not increased the school fees. We are still trying to, the parents are still paying the money they were paying before the COVID-19 pandemic. So the school fees which they were paying before in term 1, that is what they are paying right now. And even if we have some other expenses like the amount of water we are using and sanitizers and even temperature guns at the gates. So, but the amount of money remained the same, have not yet increased.
This is the first time my child is coming to study here, and when you compare to the previous school, believe this one is actually cheaper. Dr. Bulletin says her ministry is ready to mediate between parents and schools in situations when they do not agree on the fees that should be paid. No one should turn away a student during such times, and it's important for parents and schools to engage in dialogue because all parties have felt the negative effects of the pandemic. We will continue to try to bring both sides when necessary. As the government, we have repeatedly instructed that no public schools are to increase their school fees, that they are to charge what was paid during the first term, and the same applies for private schools as well. We have, however, got complaints from many parents saying some schools have been hiking prices, and we will show them that it is not fair to do so. The Ministry of Education says 70% of all students should be back in school, with some apparently thinking that studies do not begin right away, which is false. There is confidence, however, that attendance rates will rapidly improve. After 8 years of uncompensated property belonging to the locals in Gicumbi, Rulindo and Burera districts that were damaged due to the construction of power line installations by the Rwanda Energy Group, over 2,300 locals are complaining about this issue, but the Rwanda Energy Group claims only 250 haven't received compensation. Jen Mutoni now reports.
According to the locals, much of their property was damaged during the construction of power line installations, including trees that were cut down and crops that were destroyed. They say they had signed property compensation contracts but have not received any money. I came to Kigali with all my property documents, property that was destroyed worth 915,000 Rwandan francs, which includes my forest, my crops, such as cassava, beans, passion fruits, and so many more. It's been 8 years waiting for the compensation. Officials at the Rwanda Energy Group say the company Angelique International Limited is responsible for the electrical installations in the 3 districts, and that locals that haven't received compensation are partly to blame because of not submitting all necessary documents. According to RAG, out of the slightly more than 2,800 locals that have been registered for compensation, more than 2,500 have received it. The monitoring and evaluation specialist at RAG, Rutazigwa Louise, explains more.
Regarding
the issue of the constructed area, we had registered up to 2,843 for compensation, of which over 2,567 have received it, and the remaining 276 did not have the full requirements for this process, including photocopies of identity cards or bank booklets, or photocopies of their land papers. It is in our plan to make sure that by the 31st of December, they are all compensated. Local residents tell a different story, however. In Gicumbi district, apparently 3,327 locals lost their property and only 933 have received compensation, with over 2,390 having not received it yet, and some of them had all the necessary documents. They had registered about 3,327 for compensation, worth 326 million, and only 933 have received it, worth over 127 million. About 2,394 are remaining, and they are supposed to receive compensation worth over 199 million. Although each time we follow up with RAG, they tell us that some of them lack requirements needed for the process, yet it's not true, because we have personally gone through some documents and they are complete. We then gave them to evaluators at RAG, which means they haven't received compensation because their documents are pending there. Many issues of this kind have surfaced across the country due to infrastructure projects with little or no compensation to damaged property. According to the expropriation law in Rwanda, the property compensation process takes up to 90 days. In case of delays, the beneficiary is to receive an addition of 5%. Jane Mutoni, reporting for RTV.
Thank you, Jen, for that report. Now, as many as 151 adults have started training for the 68th phase of members of ex-armed groups that operate in the Democratic Republic of Congo, while 85 children that also were part of these groups have also started being trained at the Mutobo Demobilization and Reintegration Center in Musanze district. The chairperson of the Rwanda Demobilization and Reintegration Commission, Honorable Nyira Habineza Valerie, said that these had come in different ways. There are some who had handed themselves over, and others were forced to return by the Congolese armed forces. Nonetheless, the chairperson said the purpose of the training was to make them understand that they can channel their efforts for better purposes to build the country. When they're in these combat groups, they feel like their efforts should be put to disrupting the peace of Rwanda. But when they get here, it's essential that we teach them how they can divert their efforts and combine it together to work towards the agenda of the government. Both these children and adults, apart from experiencing a tough life, also have the same thing in common, and that they were taught to destroy the country. They, however, say that after they came back, they changed their minds and will not follow through with such plans. They used to tell us that when one is an ex-combatant and goes back to their country, they are killed. But after, when we found out that when you come back to Rwanda, you are treated well, you are educated, and you live like all other Rwandans. People in the country used to tell us we are just like them, but I'm proud of our Rwanda, our very beautiful Rwanda for all Rwandans, the country we didn't know that we should have known, the country that doesn't discriminate at all. Honorable Nyirahabineza Valerie, the chairperson of the Rwanda Demobilization and Reintegration Commission, emphasizes that these should be witnesses to what they've seen in Rwanda. We ask that they are witnesses to the truth, to tell the Rwandan truth, the facts that challenge the lies they were told, so that even those that aren't in Rwanda yet know the truth and come back without waiting to be brought back by force. Those that started these trainings advise their fellows who are still in the armed groups to turn away from paths that won't yield for them anything in the future and return home and share the goodness of the country. Rwanda has developed, there's security, people live in peace, and people are not violent towards one another. So I encourage them and tell them that there are no problems in Rwanda. Everybody knows who I am, and what I would tell them is to come home, to change their perceptions and look towards the future, because the Rwandan society should live in harmony. Since the start of such trainings in 2002, more than 12,000 people have completed them, with most of them having made significant progress in their lives. Now, away from Rwanda, the United States this Tuesday embarked on a major historic day in the country. Voting is underway as Americans pick their next president for the next 4 years between President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. This has been one of the most anticipated polls in recent years, especially due to the worsening coronavirus pandemic. Joining me live via Skype is Professor David Monda, a political scientist at the City University of New York, to paint a picture for us. Professor, great to be speaking to you this evening. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, hours are counting away as the country votes in one of the most anticipated and controversial election. What's the current mood in New York, where you are, and across America?
So I think the current mood in New York is quiet optimism. A lot of people are actually going out to vote. The lines in most polling stations are very long because this is the final polling day, and the polling centers end at 9 p.m. However, in terms of the businesses, a lot of businesses have boarded up, so they've reinforced their windows in anticipation possibly for some violence in the downtown area. Yeah. But I think by and large across the country, people are turning out in record numbers. And let's also not forget that about 60% of the vote has already been sent in through mail. So the people who are left over this last day are actually going to the polling booth. So I would say it's a sense of quiet optimism, and people are going to wait for the results, hopefully within the next 24 to 48 hours.
Absolutely. And looking back at the polling that we've seen in the last few months that has ultimately led to today, is there anything significant that stands out for you?
I think if you compare today, November, from when we started in January, Donald Trump began the year very much on the front note. There was no COVID-19 virus. There was no social movements, the Black Lives Matter, and the economy was doing really well. And his poll numbers were pretty decent, and he looked like he was up for re-election. He had a good chance to get re-elected. Biden, on the other hand, was even struggling to get the nomination. But 11 months later, things have really changed. Biden has picked up in the polls. He's ahead in most states, and even in the battleground states, those key states that swing from Democrats to Republicans or Republicans to Democrats. And in addition to that, now you have the worsening situation with the COVID-19, where over 250,000 Americans have died. The economy is in worse state than it's been since the Great Depression of 1932. And there's also a lot of social unrest in relation to social justice issues, specifically police violence and brutality. So all these coupled together have really weighed down on Trump's popularity. And at this point, most of the opinion polls are predicting that he will lose this election.
Yeah. Professor, let's speak a bit about foreign policy. Do you think foreign governments around the world still regard America as they used to? And should Joe Biden win, can his administration repair some of the strained relationships the U.S. has right now?
Well, I think the role of the United States is not what it was 20 years ago. Immediately the Soviet Union collapsed, the US was the dominant global power. But we've seen over the past 20 years, other major powers coming through. For example, the Chinese doing a lot of business and also re-engaging around the world. But global leaders cannot ignore the United States because it's still a major economic and military power. So I think in anticipation to either a Biden or Trump win, in terms of another Trump win, the global leaders will really look for a continuation of that America First policy. America being unilateral, America basically advancing its own interests, irrespective of global opinions. The feeling is that if Biden wins, there'll be more of a multilateral view. In other words, more of cooperation with the international community, cooperation with large countries, whether it's Russia or China, or some of the smaller economies around the world, that there'll be a global cooperation. And this is in particular context within global issues. For example, COVID-19 doesn't know international borders, whether you're from America or Kenya or Rwanda. So the anticipation is hopefully in a post-Trump era, if Biden wins, that there'll be more cooperation on some of these global issues. But if Trump wins, I think there'll be an anticipation of more of Make America Great Again and unilateral stances in terms of American foreign policy.
And in regards to Africa, if President Trump is re-elected, will he change his stand on foreign policy in Africa? And if Joe Biden wins the presidential elections, what does it mean for Africa?
So I think there's two levels to that. In terms of Trump and Africa, like I mentioned, his foreign policy has been unilateral. So when you look at U.S. policy towards Africa, what Trump's administration has been doing is to target bilateral relations as opposed to approaching Africa from a multilateral framework. In other words, Trump would rather negotiate directly with Rwanda or directly with Kenya or South Africa than to negotiate with the African Union. So in that perspective, with a Biden presidency, there'll be more of an engagement from a global perspective in terms of engagement with international organizations like the UN, engagement more with the African Union, and more of a global perspective in terms of a global cooperation mode. So with Biden, you would see more of a multilateral interaction and less of an overemphasis on unilateral American dealings. So I think in terms of the two presidencies, there'll be a consistency in terms of the advancement of U.S. national interests. But I think the approach will be different. From Trump, it will be more unilateral, America first. But from Biden, it will be more, let's cooperate as a global community through global institutions, regional institutions like the East African Community, the African Union, and institutions like the United Nations.
Interesting. Professor David, briefly, for us that are watching from outside the U.S., what should we be looking at and what should we look for about any hints about what the eventual result of this election will be?
So in terms of the general outlook, if Donald Trump loses North Carolina and he loses the state of Florida, then the signs for Trump winning re-election will be really low. He will have a very difficult chance in terms of getting re-election. But if he wins Florida and if he's able to win North Carolina and some of the Midwestern states, Wisconsin and Michigan, then you see Trump's stances really improving. In terms of Biden, if Biden wins Florida, if Biden's able to win some of those Midwestern states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and even Arizona, he'll have a very good chance of winning re-election. However, in conclusion, this election will probably not be settled within the next 24 hours. It looks like it's going to take 48, probably up to 96 hours for some kind of results to trickle in, because a lot of votes were sent in by mail. This is not a traditional election. And Donald Trump has promised to go to court even before the elections concluded. So we might definitely anticipate legal challenges, particularly if the results are close, if Biden wins by a small margin or if Trump wins by a small margin. So look forward to more drama in the days ahead from the United States.
Absolutely. Professor David Monda, thank you so much for your interesting insights about this.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right, stay well. Well, that was Professor David Monda from the City University of New York. Now, coming back to Rwanda, farmers in Nyagatare district that cultivate on consolidated land have said that agriculture has improved, but are still being affected by having no machines for cultivation, and note that using traditional methods takes too much time and effort. Sheikh Musa Fazil Harerimana, the Deputy Speaker in the Chamber of Deputies in charge of Finance and Administration, has urged these farmers to work together and buy the needed machinery. Jocelyn Mugwaneza now reports.
Nyagatare district has been commended by the Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources and other officials for the progress it has made in agriculture. However, some farmers say that they are still facing a problem of having no agriculture machines that cultivate on the consolidated land. And this is a problem that is still affecting their agricultural activities.
We as farmers, the more we engage in agriculture, the more it becomes a profession. What shows that it has become a profession is that the harvest keeps on increasing. We used to get 2 tons per hectare, but it's now 4.5 tons per hectare. And even though we enjoy practicing agriculture, we are still using traditional methods, and we are facing a challenge of having no machines. So when we cultivate on consolidated land, we have to rent machines from other cooperatives, which is not cheap or easy.
The members of parliament that are visiting Nyagatare district as part of their outreach initiative have had discussions about issues found in agriculture, as well as assessing the challenges faced by farmers. Honorable Sheikh Musa Fazil Harerimana, the Deputy Speaker of Parliament in the Chamber of Deputies, in charge of Finance and Administration, has advised farmers to buy their own machines on credit.
You have seen that they've given us an example of someone that bought a machine and they now all go to him when they need it, which means that the owner benefits from this. You've heard that I told them that the owner will tell you that he got a loan from the bank. What if you go as a cooperative? Do you think the bank won't give you the loan? They replied, yes, they can. It means that good imitation should be done and people should work together and take a loan because it is a legal cooperative, and then they will have the required machines.
Except the agriculture sector, the members of parliament will visit other sectors and activities in Nyagatare district to see how far they have gone. Nyagatare district is being commended that hygiene has improved, and so did agriculture. More effort is needed to be put in education and in registering children in civil status registers.
In sports matters now, the Rwanda Broadcasting Agency has signed an agreement with Rwanda's football governing body over copyright in broadcasts following lengthy negotiations. Sessionary now reports.
3-year agreement between both parties comes following lengthy negotiations, and it has been noted that the game of football in Rwanda has a lot of potential that can be exploited. You know that football is a loved game in the country, that many Rwandans follow the game and that it brings them a lot of joy. So this is a big product we must value accordingly, which is why we took the initiative as RBA to approach Ferwafa, resulting in this agreement that we can all benefit from. I have no doubt that much is to come from this 3-year agreement, and as RBA we are ready to make this partnership productive and much better than what you see coming from elsewhere, especially because it is our own as Rwandans and we must all reap the benefits together. Ferwafa officials agree that this is an agreement everyone will benefit from. All members will benefit because this is not for the executive committee members or the administration of this place. This is for the members, and each will get their share depending on how much has been generated. Like I told you, it is not a specific amount that can be shared right now, with each allocated a given amount of money. The context of the contract is specific in mentioning that we will share what is generated. That means after we have deducted what our partners are owed and what remains belongs to Ferwafa, then we will sit, look at all the challenges we are facing and decide what each member gets. This latest agreement gives RBA broadcast rights, but not all matches will necessarily be aired. You know that as RBA we have many events across the country that require our presence, but we will strive to broadcast as many games as possible. The agreement specifies that on match day, we must broadcast at least 2 games as a minimum. We will broadcast more when we do not have many other commitments, but we have committed to at least 2 on match day. Unlike the previous agreement Ferwafa had with other parties, RBA will not get naming rights to the league. That is still up for grabs and could be settled soon with a local brewery company.
On behalf of the entire news production team, thank you for your company tonight. Stay well and stay safe. Have a lovely rest of the week. God bless you and keep you. And until next time, I'm Gloria Mutesi.